All right, Penn State football fans, welcome back to another edition of the Penn State Blitz here on Penn Live. Greg, a lot to get to. This is a pretty special Tuesday.
It is.
We'll have more on that a little bit later, but there's so much to discuss, both with Penn State moving forward and what happened Saturday against Ohio State. We got 4 downs for you. Hopefully we'll have a couple overtime segments with questions and comments from the Penn State fan base. We always look forward to that. Before we get started on our 4 downs, though, just a reminder you guys need to subscribe to Penn Live's Penn State channel on YouTube. Always good stuff, always updated. You never know what's going to pop up there next. You never know what Dave Jones is going to say after a football game. I don't know what he's going to say, or on a ride along.
That's right.
So yeah, you got to subscribe to this channel. You can do it by going to youtube.com/allpennstate. With that out of the way, Greg, you know a little bit about what James Franklin talked about at his Tuesday press conference with Penn State getting ready to play at Michigan State. And I thought it was interesting, and I know you picked up on it, and it's probably not a big deal, but after they lost to Ohio State 39-38, there was a players-only meeting.
Right.
And James brought that up, said he had nothing to do with it. And what do you think they talked about?
Yeah, I'm sure it was, let's stay on schedule here. So remember after the last big loss, which was Michigan last year, there was a gathering that pretty much set things on course. That didn't happen until Monday after the Michigan game. This happened on Sunday after the Ohio State game. And I thought it was interesting that James specifically said it was get some things off their chest, but it wasn't a big deal. But there was some tension somewhere along the way. I think that this is a group of very strong-willed veteran leaders. Yeah. And I'm sure that they came out of that probably better off than they were before they even left to go to Columbus. Not to mention just the loss and the meeting itself. Yeah. But I just think that when you get into the grueling grind of a season like this, and you have a very tight loss where there's many, as James Franklin said after the game, plenty of blame to go around. I think you probably feel a little bit better. Everyone gets in a room, gets whatever they want to say out, and you just get back to practice on Sunday. I'm sure it was not fun for the Penn State players to practice on Sunday. They had a lot of stuff to correct and clean up, but at the end of the day, I think they'll be better for it going forward in November.
So before we get to second down, if you had to guess who the Penn State leaders were that really spoke up in the meeting, I have a couple of guesses. I'm fairly sure that Jason Kabinda and maybe Mike Jasicki and Trace McSorley were involved. Think anyone else on this team maybe wanted to get something off their chest?
I don't know. I don't know if I want to characterize it that way, but in terms of the guys that talked, I'm sure Marcus Allen, he's a very fiery guy, a very big leader of the defense. I'd be surprised if Saquon Barkley didn't mention a few things. I'm sure there were a lot of guys that spoke up. There were a lot of guys that, Tyler Davis even perhaps, Nick Scott. When you talk about special teams leadership, I mean, the good thing for Penn State is they have a lot of guys that are able to steal a phrase from PJ Fleck, row the boat in the right direction and get the boat going in the right direction. And so I think there were probably a number of guys that spoke up, and everyone got out what they needed to get out. And you could tell James Franklin, I think, was pleased that happened, and it's something they can move forward from now. Yeah,
and this does not strike me as a crisis players only meeting. I think frustration would probably be the word. They had an 18-point lead in the first half. They were up 11 with 5 minutes to go. They had to have been frustrated. Ohio State was very good in the fourth quarter. But when the stakes are that high, unbeaten season, number 2 team in the country, and you're up 11 with a little over 5 minutes to go and you don't close it out, there's got to be some frustrations. I think some things need to be talked about. It's not always easy to talk about it amongst the players, in the locker room after the game because they have to get on a plane, and they're probably exhausted. They have a Sunday practice. So, I mean, I don't read a lot into this other than the fact that, hey, if anyone has something to say, let's talk about it now. We've got a month to go. We still have a ton to play for. So I don't think this was a stressful situation at all. I just think they had to. They felt very strongly about having the meeting. So we'll see. We'll see if they talk about it after the Michigan State game. So let's get to second down. And here's a question I have for you. What about the 2 Ryans? I mean, the Penn State's going into this game. They're a little bit more than a touchdown favorite, but in the Ohio State game, Greg, they lost Ryan Buchholz, a starting defensive end, early in the game. It did not look good. No. And then Ryan Bates, their left tackle and arguably their best offensive lineman, it looked like Saquon Barkley rolled up on him on his left leg after Saquon carried the game. He came back in, but you could tell it was still bothering him. He couldn't finish the game. They had to go with Will Fries at left tackle and Chaz Wright at right tackle. What are your thoughts on this? On maybe the status of those two players?
Yeah, someone wanted to read into the fact that they talked about Chaz Wright. James Franklin talked about Chaz Wright needing him to play a good game this weekend as the basis to say Ryan Bates is out. At this point, you feel like you've been burned too many times trying to read in the James Franklin injury quotes or injury updates to really feel good about it one way or the other. If I had to guess, though, I think he might be more likely to play than Ryan Buchholz.
Right.
I mean, Ryan Buchholz limped off the field with the help of crutches.
Sure.
He was hopping around on the sideline shoeless before they finally took him to the locker room. Let's mention he was carted off the field and carted to the locker room. It's just very difficult to see how you could recover from that in a week unless it was all so precautionary as to get him back to State College, get some ice, get it up and elevated, and maybe be okay. So I would probably give Ryan Bates the benefit of the doubt here just because he was able to come back in for a series. Conversely, if you don't come back into that game, we all know how tough Ryan Bates is. We're pretty sure he would have done anything he could to get back into that game.
He was trying very hard to get
it was
back
that
on.
bad. You just wonder how bad it was. Because if you're not going to come back into that game and they're not going to let you come back in, it has to be pretty bad.
Yeah. Third down, we're going to dovetail on what we talked about with Ryan Buchholz. They're already down Torrance Brown. He's out for the year. So no Buchholz, no Torrance Brown, assuming Ryan doesn't play against Michigan State. What happens is now Penn State's the young defensive ends on the roster are really in focus. They played a lot of snaps against Ohio State. Before I get your thoughts on Penn State's young defensive ends, I think James Franklin alluded to this when he talked about defensive line versatility. One move Penn State could make without Buchholz is they could kick Kevin Givens, out to end to play some snaps. They like him as the three-technique pass rusher, but he can play some end, and I wouldn't rule out seeing him. But they have a lot of young defensive ends. They have a true freshman defensive end. What do you make of that group?
Here's the problem. Can they hold up for 4 quarters? That's really what I mean. We talked so often earlier in the year about this group being deep, and it is. But now they're down to a starter at the beginning of the year and a starter after the starter went out. You saw Shaka Toney play a career high in snaps. If you go back and watch the 4th quarter, he did not have the juice to rush the passer that he did previously in other games this year, which is obvious because he was playing, let's just say for the sake of example, 15. In this game, he played 45. It's gonna take a toll on you. So I think they probably have to go in with a plan, and they will, of rotating these guys pretty heavily. You'll see Shane Simmons get involved. Yetur Gross-Matos is a guy that James Franklin pointed out on Tuesday, earlier today, as a guy that will get into that rotation more and more. And you just wonder, as a guy like Daniel Joseph may be in line for more snaps, Shane Simmons. There's a couple of guys that they can put in more, get more action from. It's just a matter of holding up for 4 quarters, I think, that is going to be the issue they face. And Sharif Miller, too, he's now in a situation where you maybe never take him off the field.
Yeah, and that's not good. I think, Greg, what magnifies this is Torrance Brown and Ryan Buchholz were probably their 2 best defensive ends against the run. And they're facing now a Michigan State team, noon kick, travel week. These guys are, I think physical preparation is going to be a key in this game because you played 78 snaps, the defense.
It's not a problem.
Against
we
Ohio
heard
State.
Today, it was not a problem.
I asked him about that. I said, look, you play 78 snaps against Ohio State plus 2 4th-down conversion tries. I don't think they count as snaps, so that's really 80. You played Michigan the week before, and now you got to go to Michigan State travel, noon kick, and you're down a couple of players. I think they have to be really careful, not only with the defensive linemen, but their whole defensive setup, because I think, they came out of that game probably a little bit worse for wear. I mean, they had to have been impacted by that up-tempo Ohio State offense. So I think it's something really, Greg, that they have to bear. It bears close scrutiny, especially early in the game and late in the game against Michigan State. 4th down, Greg, not really related to James Franklin's Tuesday news conference, but we said this is a pretty big Tuesday because it kicks off the college football playoff rankings. They're going to be released later tonight. The initial rankings, top 25, but really all that matters, a couple things. Who are the top 4? Where does Penn State factor in the rankings? What do you think's going to happen?
I thought you were going to talk about Maction Tuesday. I am surprised we ended up
I'm pretty pumped about Maction Tuesday.
I love Maction Tuesday. At any rate, though, I mean, so you got Penn State at 7 in the AP poll, the coaches poll. And the question becomes, does the selection committee look at this and say, okay, let's get a baseline, and do we move some teams up or down? Oklahoma's another one that's going to come into play since it beat Ohio State. Do we use what happened, a couple of these things that happened that aren't reflected in the AP and coaches poll because of how they were set up with preseason rankings? Does that come into play, or do they just blow it up and start from scratch?
Yeah.
To me, that's the question. So I could see Penn State as high as 5. I don't think they're any lower than 7.
Right.
So I see them in that range, and it's the best prediction I can give without knowing exactly how they're going to approach things. If you know anything about the committee, they're almost anything but consistent, and there's also some new people involved with this year, including Ohio State AD Gene Smith. So we'll see how things play out.
Yeah, to me, the two most interesting teams to watch, in addition to Penn State, because they lose by a point. Ohio State certainly by the end of that game was playing better, but they played them in the horseshoe, and it was a great environment, a great game. The two teams I'm curious to see what the committee are going to do with Oklahoma, you mentioned, and also Clemson. Clemson, obviously defending national championship. When they play their A game, they're tough to beat, but that loss at Syracuse, that has to work against them. And I do think that Oklahoma winning in Columbus, and then that loss to Iowa State looks better and better. That's not a bad team. They just beat TCU.
Yep.
I think you're looking at 7, 8 teams, really, that you could probably make a case for being in the Final Four, including Wisconsin, the Big Ten team that no one talks about.
Right.
They're probably they have a real great shot at being unbeaten going into the Big Ten title game.
Yeah.
I just think it's going to be fascinating to see, Greg, how closely they mirror the AP rankings, and how crazy does Penn State's fan base flip out if Penn State is not slotted where they want them to be. I think it's going to be a pretty interesting Tuesday. Yep. In addition to Maction Tuesday, the MAC football games now get played on Tuesdays and Wednesdays.
Exciting.
I'll be watching with eagerly watching to see what happens. That's great. So those are 4 downs, Greg, here on the Penn State Blitz. And now it's time to get to the overtime session. If we have any questions or comments, Greg.
Oh, there's lots of them today. It's hard to believe the Penn State fans are eager to talk about the state of the program at the moment. All right, we'll start with Barry since he's on top here. And he wants to know about Gesicki disappearing in the mix when few teams have the talent to stop him, especially no play action in the red zone. And I don't know if you were still on, but James Franklin had mentioned late in his news conference that one of the red zone plays was a designed fade to Mike Gesicki. If you go back and look at it was definitely, the route was there. The problem was Ohio State carried 2 defensive backs with him because, Barry, your point is well taken that, he's a threat in the red zone. And people, Greg Schiano specifically, who is well aware of, between Rutgers and Ohio State, well aware of what Mike Gesicki can do, they're not going to let Mike beat them late in the game. Yeah. So to me, I think that's probably the biggest reason why.
Yeah, and even on Penn State's final ill-fated drive, Trace was looking for him, and they had 2 defenders aside to him. I think the biggest problem with getting Gesicki involved against Ohio State was, by the end of that game, the pass rush, especially with Bates out, all 4 defensive linemen were literally in McSorley's face before he could even set his feet to throw. He was on the run. They didn't even have to blitz. You could talk about getting Mike Gesicki involved down the field, but that takes a little bit of time. Right. And Penn State's offensive line, I'm sorry, they were just overrun. Ohio State was playing out of its mind. Mm-hmm. He did make 1 catch, I think, up the left sideline.
Yeah, big catch, 3rd down.
They need to get him more involved, but they ask him to do a couple things that I think the fan base forgets. I mean, if they don't have Bates, he might have to do a little bit more blocking. Yep. It's just there's no easy answer. They can't just line him up and throw to him 10 to 12 times a game. It's just not going to happen. They got to pick their spots, get their matchup, get the matchup they want. But I do agree that they definitely have to find a way to get him more involved.
Yeah, no question. I think the other thing James Franklin mentioned, too, before we get to another question, is that they went back and watched the tape. Because remember after the game, James Franklin said he felt the team changed its identity late in the 4th quarter. Not just on the red zone drive, but also on the final drive that they had. And, I think he was getting at the fact that and he kind of mentioned it in his answer, they're a pass team to set up the run. And here they're trying to run the ball, and they were keyed on. He said the problem is we went back and watched the tape, and we weren't going to be able to pass the ball either. So
trust me, it was impossible for Penn State to throw the ball or run the ball late. The defensive line of Ohio State took that game over, and then the question was not if but when they were going to take over that game.
All right, we got one more coming, Bob, and it's actually in the vein of what we're just talking about here, and it's that Penn State's offensive line was supposed to be a strength coming into the season. Obviously recruited the position very well, rankings-wise at least.
Right.
So when is it going to show up on the field where we don't have a season where this conversation seems to eventually come into play? Injuries have at times been a factor, not only with guys that are starting, but also guys in the developmental stages as well. Is it something that's fixed soon, or is it going to take a little bit longer than maybe James Franklin and us in the media and also fans thought or hoped it would?
Yeah, I think, well, now that we're 2/3 of the way through the regular season, I mean, there's room for a little bit of improvement.
Yep.
Excuse me, but it's going to happen. It'll have to wait till 2018. A couple of things I think to keep an eye on. I think that next year, Will Fries to me is part of the solution.
Absolutely.
I think that he's got a home at right tackle. I think he's comfortable there. I thought he played pretty well against Michigan's Rashawn Gary 2 weeks ago. I think Bates and Fries at the tackle spots. I think that Connor McGovern is continuing to find his way at center. The question is going to be the guard spots with Mann moving on.
Yep.
Excuse me. And Steven Gonzalez, I think he's not quite there yet. I think a lot of people expected Michael Bennett to be part of the rotation or maybe pressing for playing time. It is a little bit surprising that he has not. To me, it's been a little bit surprising that he has not really seen the field. I know he's been banged up a little bit, but I also think that two other players can really help them next year. Is Mike Miranda is one.
Absolutely.
And I think C.J. Thorpe is a guy that you hear good things about on the practice field. They like his demeanor. He's a physical player. He's right. The offensive line I thought would be further along at this point. And now if Ryan Bates can't play at Michigan State, I think if he can't play against Michigan State, this is going to be a very interesting game because it's tough to play on the road, Greg. He's their best player, and if they don't have him, I think it really limits some of the things they can do.
Yeah. No question. All right, well, before we wrap it up, we won't leave Tom hanging, but he asked about why didn't Penn State's defense blitz. Just be quick and short about it. James Franklin made a fair point yesterday, or earlier on Tuesday. He said, people keep saying, why didn't we blitz? He said, we sent 5, we sent 6. They picked it up every single time. That's essentially what it came down to. If you go back and watch it, it wasn't for a lack of trying.
Yeah.
They just couldn't get there, Bob. They couldn't. And that's because shouldn't be an issue they face this week, but with some injuries and things, and a pretty veteran in some ways, Michigan State offensive line, got to keep an eye on it again.
Yeah, you blitz J.T. Barrett and don't get there. Those receivers are fast enough. I mean, they were just big plays waiting to happen all the way down the field. I thought actually Penn State's defense was a little fortunate in that they could have given up some more points. There were some calls that weren't made, and there were some calls. They didn't play awful, but that offense and that tempo and those athletes in that environment, I mean, it was, Ohio State fell behind in the 8 ball right away, 14-0 because of the Barkley kick return, and then Manny Bowen forced a fumble. It's 14-0. But once they kind of hit their groove, Penn State's defense was just in trouble, especially after Buchholz got hurt. So you can try and scheme up the Ohio State Buckeyes, but the athletes on that field, I think you really have to be careful because they're so dangerous in space.
Yep.
So that's a wrap on the Penn State Blitz for this week. Lots of good comments and questions. I like that. And we got Michigan State. Penn State's got Michigan State this week in East Lansing at noon. Just a reminder, you got to subscribe to the Penn Live Penn State channel on YouTube. It's youtube.com/allpennstate. That's it for this week. We'll have a lot more to talk about next week.